The first time Captain Marcus Brant saw the Filipino Aviator, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind of chuckle a master gives a child holding a wooden sword. Marcus was from Hamburg, trained in the strictest schools in Europe, with 15,000 hours in his logbook and a chest full of medals for precision flying. He had flown into Ninoy Aquino International Airport on a charter mission, bringing in medical supplies from Frankfurt. His co-pilot that day was sick, so the local airline had assigned a replacement. A Filipino. Young. Maybe 30 years old. His name was Captain Rico Santos. Rico stood by the boarding stairs with his shoulders straight and his eyes calm. He wore a simple white shirt with epaulettes and a small Philippine flag sewn over his heart. Marcus looked at him and saw a provincial pilot. Someone who had probably learned to fly over jungles and rice paddies, not over the disciplined airspace of Europe. Marcus extended his hand and said, "You are my first officer today?" Rico shook it firmly. "Yes, sir." Marcus smiled and said, "Stay close. Follow my commands exactly. This is a powerful machine. Not a jeepney." Rico did not smile back. He said, "I know this plane, Captain. I studied its manual for 3 years. I have flown its sister ship 100 times. Marcus raised one eyebrow but said nothing. He climbed into the cockpit and buckled in, already deciding he would do most of the work himself. The flight from Manila to Cebu was short. Only an hour and 15 minutes. But the weather that morning was violent. A tropical depression had formed overnight, and the radar showed red cells stacked from 15,000 feet to the stratosphere. Marcus studied the screen and frowned. He had flown through typhoons before, but always with a full crew he trusted. Now he had this quiet Filipino beside him, someone who had never spoken a single unnecessary word since takeoff. Marcus pointed at the radar. "We will divert south. Avoid the worst cells." Rico looked at the same screen and shook his head. "No, Captain. That path takes us over the mountains. The downdrafts there are worse. We should go northeast, through the gap between the 2 red cells." Marcus stared at him. "That gap is narrow." "Too narrow." Rico said, "It is wide enough. I have flown it 30 times. Marcus felt his pride sting. He was not used to being corrected by a regional pilot. He said, "I am the captain. We go south." Rico paused, then nodded. "Yes, sir." He said nothing else, but his jaw tightened. The plane turned south. For the first 20 minutes, the southern route felt smooth. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He checked the fuel, the altitude, the engine temperatures. Everything was perfect. He looked over at Rico, who was quietly monitoring the weather radar on his own screen. Rico's left hand rested on the yoke, loose and relaxed. Too relaxed, Marcus thought. Then the first jolt came. It was not turbulence. It was a punch. The plane dropped 50 feet in half a second. Marcus grabbed the yoke and pulled up. The engines whined. The second jolt was worse. The plane rolled left, then right, then left again. Alarms started beeping. Terrain. Terrain. Pull up. Marcus looked at the radar and felt his blood turn cold. The red cells had merged. They were surrounded. Rain slammed against the windshield like gravel. The plane shook so hard that loose pens flew from the console. Marcus shouted, "I am losing control." Rico did not shout. He reached across and flipped 3 switches in 2 seconds. He engaged the anti-ice system, reduced thrust on the left engine, and pulled the yoke into his stomach. He said, "My controls." Marcus hesitated. For one terrible second, his pride fought against his survival instinct. Then he let go. Rico flew the plane like a man dancing with a wild animal. He did not fight the storm. He moved with it. He let the plane rise and fall but kept the nose pointed exactly 15 degrees above the horizon. He talked to the passengers over the intercom in a voice that was calm and warm, like a father telling a bedtime story. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some weather. Please remain seated. We will land safely." Marcus watched him. He watched the Filipino's eyes move from the altimeter to the attitude indicator to the vertical speed gauge and back again. Every movement was precise. Every decision was fast. Rico found the gap. It had moved east, but he found it. He pushed the throttles forward and aimed the plane into a tunnel of gray air between two towering thunderstorms. For 90 seconds, they flew blind. Rain turned the windows into waterfalls. The plane groaned like a wounded animal. Then, suddenly, they were through. Blue sky. Green islands below. The ocean sparkling. Marcus let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He looked at Rico and opened his mouth to speak. But Rico was already calling Cebu Tower, requesting landing clearance, his voice still calm. He landed the plane so gently that the passengers clapped. After they parked, Marcus sat in his seat for a long time. Then he turned to Rico and said, "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Rico unbuckled his harness and stood up. He looked down at the German captain and said, "In the Philippines, Captain. We learned to dance in the rain." He walked out of the cockpit without another word. That night, Marcus found Rico in a small staff cafeteria drinking instant coffee from a paper cup. Marcus sat across from him and said, "I was wrong about you. I am sorry." Rico looked up. He did not say it is okay. He said, "Most people are wrong about us. About Filipino pilots. They think we are second class because we come from a poor country." Marcus nodded. He felt shame hot in his chest. He said, "I want to fly with you again. I want to learn from you." Rico studied him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. This time, Marcus shook it like a brother. Over the next 6 months, Marcus and Rico became a legendary team. They flew together from Manila to Singapore, to Tokyo, to Sydney, to Dubai. Marcus taught Rico advanced instrument navigation. Rico taught Marcus how to read the sky in the tropics, how to smell a coming storm, how to feel the wind change in his bones. They shared meals. They shared stories. Marcus learned that Rico had grown up in a small fishing village on the island of Palawan, that his father was a fisherman who had saved for 10 years to send his son to flight school. Rico learned that Marcus had lost his own father in a plane crash when he was 12, that he had sworn that day to become the safest pilot in the world. They became more than colleagues. They became family. Then came the flight that changed everything. It was November 17th. A red-eye from Manila to Haneda, Tokyo. The plane was an Airbus A330, full with 247 passengers. The weather was clear. The pre-flight checks were perfect. Marcus was captain. Rico was first officer. They took off at midnight, lifting over the dark sea, the lights of Manila fading behind them like scattered diamonds. For 2 hours, the flight was smooth. Rico told a joke about a monkey and a flight attendant. Marcus laughed so hard he snorted. Then, at 3 in the morning, the left engine exploded. The sound was not a bang. It was a tearing, screaming, metal-ripping roar. The plane jerked violently to the left. Alarms screamed. Red lights flashed across the cockpit like angry fireflies. Master warning. Engine fire. Hydraulic pressure low. Electrical fault. Marcus grabbed the yoke and fought to keep the wings level. The left wing was on fire. Fuel was streaming from the engine. The plane was losing altitude fast. Marcus shouted, "Engine fire checklist." Rico was already there. His fingers flew across the overhead panel. He shut off the fuel valve. He pulled the fire extinguisher handle. He cut the hydraulic supply. He did it all in less than 10 seconds. Marcus said, "Mayday. Mayday. Mayday. This is Delta 247. Engine fire. Declaring emergency. Rico, what is our closest airport?" Rico looked at the navigation display. His face was pale but his voice was steady. "There is nothing close, Captain. The nearest is Manila. 320 kilometers behind us. Or we go forward to Haneda. 500 kilometers ahead." Marcus did the math in his head. With one engine, burning extra fuel because of the drag from the damaged wing, they did not have enough to reach either airport. They were going down. He said, "We are not going to make it." Rico did not accept that. He pulled up a map of the Philippine Sea. He pointed at a small green dot 200 kilometers to the east. "What about that?" Marcus squinted. It was a military airfield. American. On the island of Okinawa. The runway was short. Very short. Only 7,000 feet. For a damaged A330 loaded with fuel and passengers, that was almost impossible. Marcus said, "We will crash." Rico said, "No. We will not. I have practiced this landing. In the simulator. 100 times. Marcus stared at him. "You practiced landing a heavy jet on a short runway with one engine?" Rico nodded. "Every Filipino pilot does. Our country has many short runways. It is in our training." Marcus wanted to argue. But he remembered the storm over Cebu. He remembered how Rico had found the gap when he could not. He took a breath and said, "Take us there." Rico took the controls. He turned the damaged plane toward Okinawa. The fire on the left wing had stopped, but the wing itself was shredded. The plane shook constantly. The passengers were screaming in the cabin. The flight attendants were doing their best to keep everyone calm. But in the cockpit, there was only Rico's voice, soft and steady, reading altitudes and speeds like a prayer. 50 miles out. 30 miles. 10 miles. The runway lights appeared below them like a string of pearls on black velvet. Rico lowered the landing gear. The plane wobbled. The right engine strained. Rico said, "Hang on, my friend." Then he brought the plane down. The landing was brutal. The left landing gear touched first, then the right. The plane skidded. Tires blew out. Sparks flew like a waterfall of fire. The passengers screamed. Marcus braced himself against the console. But Rico kept the nose up. He pulled back on the yoke, using the tail as an air brake. The plane slowed. Slower. Slower. Then it stopped. It stopped exactly on the runway, not a meter of pavement wasted. Rico cut the engines. He turned off the alarms. He sat back in his seat and looked at Marcus. His hands were shaking now. His face was wet with sweat. But he smiled. He said, "See? Short runway. No problem." Marcus stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a wild, exhausted, tearful laugh. He reached over and grabbed Rico's shoulder. "You crazy Filipino," he said. "You beautiful, crazy Filipino. You saved us all." The aftermath was chaos and relief mixed together like rain and tears. Firefighters ran toward the plane. Ambulance lights painted the runway in red and white. Passengers slid down the emergency chutes, some crying, some laughing, some falling to their knees to kiss the ground. Marcus and Rico stood at the bottom of the evacuation slide, counting passengers as they came down. 247. Every single one alive. A fire chief ran up to them, his face red from the heat of the smoldering engine. He shouted, "Who was flying this thing?" Marcus pointed at Rico. He did. The fire chief looked at Rico's small frame, his calm eyes, his uniform still crisp despite the emergency. The chief shook his head and said, "That was the best emergency landing I have seen in 20 years. Rico nodded once, said thank you, then turned back to help an elderly woman off the slide. Marcus watched him and felt something shift inside his chest. It was not just respect anymore. It was awe. The investigation took 3 months. Aviation authorities from Japan, the United States, Germany, and the Philippines all wanted answers. They took the black box. They examined every piece of the shattered engine. They interviewed Marcus and Rico separately for hours. The final report was simple: a manufacturing defect had caused a fan blade to crack and break, sending shrapnel through the engine housing. The defect was not the pilot's fault. But the landing? That was a miracle. The report said, and Marcus remembered these words for the rest of his life, the first officer's decision to divert to Okinawa rather than attempt a longer flight to a major airport demonstrated extraordinary judgment. His landing technique on a short runway with a single engine and significant airframe damage exceeded standard training protocols. His actions directly saved 247 lives. The aviation world went crazy. News crews flew to Manila. Reporters wanted Rico's face on every screen. They called him the hero of Okinawa. They asked him how he felt. Rico stood in front of the cameras in his white uniform, the Philippine flag still sewn over his heart, and said only this: "I was just doing my job. My country trained me well. My captain trusted me. That is all." Marcus gave a different interview. He sat in a hotel room in Tokyo with a glass of water in his hand and tears in his eyes. He told the reporter everything. How he had laughed at Rico on that first day. How he had called the plane too powerful for a jeepney driver. How Rico had saved the flight over Cebu when Marcus wanted to go south. The reporter asked, "What did you learn from Captain Santos?" Marcus put down the glass. He looked directly into the camera. He said, "I learned that pride is a poison. I learned that a man's skill has nothing to do with his passport. I learned that the best pilot I have ever flown with is a Filipino who learned to read the sky over fishing boats and rice fields. And I learned that if you are lucky enough to find a brother like Rico Santos, you hold on to him." The interview went viral. Millions of people watched it. In the Philippines, they played it on every news channel. In Germany, people sent Marcus letters of apology for their own assumptions about developing nations. But Rico did not care about any of that. He went back to flying. He went back to his normal routes, his normal schedules, his normal life. He did not ask for a promotion. He did not write a book. He just showed up to work every day and did his job. Marcus asked him once, "Why don't you take the fame? You earned it." Rico was checking a weather report. He looked up and said, "Fame does not help you land a plane in a storm. Training does. Practice does. Humility does. I would rather be a good pilot than a famous one." For 2 more years, they flew together. They became the most requested crew in the airline. Passengers asked to be on their flights. Other pilots asked to observe them in the cockpit. They developed a silent communication, a way of understanding each other without words. Marcus would tap the throttle twice when he wanted more power. Rico would tilt his head to the left when he saw weather ahead. They finished each other's checklists. They completed each other's sentences. Their bond was deeper than friendship. It was the bond of men who had stared into the dark together and walked away. Marcus started calling Rico his little brother. Rico started calling Marcus his big German bear. They celebrated Christmas together in Manila. Marcus learned to eat balot, the Filipino duck egg, and pretended to like it. Rico learned to drink German beer and actually liked it. They were happy. That should have been the end of the story. A story about pride falling, brotherhood rising, and a quiet hero who never wanted a crown. But life is not a fairy tale. Life is a storm. And the worst storms come when you least expect them. It happened on a Tuesday. The flight was from Manila to Davao, a short domestic run, only an hour and a half. Marcus was on vacation in Thailand, so Rico was flying with a different first officer, a young woman named Captain Elena Cruz, also Filipino, also excellent. The weather was clear. The plane was a smaller jet, an Airbus A320, just 150 passengers. Takeoff was at 7 in the morning. Rico lifted the plane over the mountains of Luzon, banked south over the blue water, and settled into cruise at 28,000 feet. Elena was reading the landing checklist. Rico was drinking coffee from a thermos. It was a normal day. A boring day. The kind of day pilots love because nothing goes wrong. Then the warning light came on. Not an engine warning. Not a fire warning. Something worse. A red light blinking next to the word hydraulics. Elena saw it first. She said, "Captain, we have a problem." Rico set down his coffee. He looked at the gauge. The hydraulic pressure was dropping fast. Hydraulic fluid was the blood of the plane. It controlled the brakes, the steering, the flaps, the spoilers. Without it, the plane could still fly. But it could not land. Not safely. Rico keyed the microphone and said, "Manila Center, Delta 512, we are declaring an emergency. Complete hydraulic failure. Request immediate vectors back to Manila." The controller's voice cracked. "Roger, Delta 512. You are cleared direct to Manila. What is your passenger count?" Rico said, 150 souls. Then he looked at Elena and said, "Call Marcus. Tell him what is happening. Tell him I said thank you." Elena's hands shook as she dialed Marcus's phone. It rang 4 times. Then Marcus answered, his voice sleepy from a beach nap. Elena said, "Captain Santos is in trouble. Hydraulic failure. Returning to Manila." Marcus went silent. Then he said, "Put him on." Rico took the phone. He said, "Big German bear, I have to go." Marcus said, "No. No, no, no. You listen to me. You are the best pilot I know. You land this plane. You walk away. You hear me?" Rico smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. He said, "I will try." Then he handed the phone back to Elena and took the controls. The approach to Manila was a nightmare without hydraulics. Rico could not lower the flaps, so the plane had to come in fast, very fast, almost 200 knots instead of the normal 130. He could not use the spoilers to slow down. He could not use the wheel brakes effectively once they touched the ground. He had only reverse thrust from the engines and his own skill to stop the plane before it ran off the end of the runway. Elena read the emergency checklist aloud. Rico followed every step. He lowered the landing gear using the manual gravity release, a crank between the seats that took all his strength to turn. The gear came down with a heavy thunk. 3 green lights. Good. He aimed for runway 24, the longest runway at Manila, nearly 11,000 feet. He told Elena to warn the tower. "Foam the runway. Have every fire truck ready." Elena did. The tower asked, "Do you want to declare a full emergency?" Rico said, "I want to go home." Then he brought the plane down. The landing was harder than Okinawa. The plane hit the runway and bounced. Rico pulled back, let it settle, then pushed the throttles into reverse. The engines roared backward. But without brakes, the plane kept rolling. Fast. Too fast. The end of the runway was coming. Elena shouted, "Captain, we are not stopping. Rico pulled the emergency brake handle anyway, even though he knew it would not work without hydraulics. Nothing happened. The plane screamed toward the overrun area, a patch of soft concrete designed to catch planes that could not stop. They hit it at 60 knots. The plane lurched. Dust and debris flew everywhere. Then the nose gear collapsed. The front of the plane slammed into the ground. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. The cabin tilted forward at a sickening angle. Rico's harness cut into his shoulders. Elena hit her head on the console. Then everything went dark. Marcus heard the news 3 hours later. He was on a boat in Thailand when his phone exploded with messages. He read the first one and felt the world fall away. Emergency landing. Hydraulic failure. Manila. Captain Santos injured. He did not read the rest. He ran. He ran off the boat, through the beach, into a taxi, to the airport. He bought the first ticket to Manila. The flight was 5 hours. He spent every second staring at the seat in front of him, praying to a God he had not spoken to since his father died. He landed in Manila at midnight. He took another taxi to the hospital. He ran through the emergency room doors, his shirt soaked with sweat, his eyes wild. He found a nurse and screamed, "Where is Captain Rico Santos?" The nurse pointed to a door at the end of the hall. Marcus ran. He pushed the door open. Inside, a doctor stood beside a bed. On the bed lay Rico. His face was bruised. His arm was in a cast. His eyes were closed. But he was alive. Marcus fell to his knees beside the bed and wept. Rico opened his eyes. He saw Marcus crying and tried to smile. His voice was a whisper. "Big German bear, why are you crying?" "I am fine." Marcus grabbed Rico's good hand and held it tight. He said, "You almost died." Rico coughed a small laugh. He said, "In the Philippines, we say that death is just a neighbor. Sometimes he knocks. But you do not have to open the door." Marcus laughed through his tears. He said, "You crazy Filipino. You beautiful, crazy Filipino." Rico squeezed his hand. He said, "All 150 passengers survived. Elena is okay too. Everyone is okay." Marcus looked at the doctor. The doctor nodded. "Minor injuries only. A miracle." Marcus looked back at Rico. He said, "You did it again. You saved everyone." Rico closed his eyes. He said, "No, my friend. We saved everyone. You trained me. You trusted me. You loved me. That is why I am still here." Then he fell asleep, still holding Marcus's hand. And Marcus stayed there all night, sitting on the cold hospital floor, watching his brother breathe. Rico recovered slowly. The cast came off after 6 weeks. The bruises faded after 2 months. But the thing that took longest to heal was not his body. It was his heart. Not because he was sad. Because he was overwhelmed. After the hydraulic failure landing, the world paid attention again. This time, they would not leave him alone. The President of the Philippines invited him to the palace. The Pope sent a blessing from Rome. Airlines from around the world offered him jobs with salaries that made his eyes water. A movie studio called. A book publisher called. Everyone wanted a piece of the Filipino pilot who could not stop saving lives. Rico said no to almost all of it. He took one promotion, to training captain, because it meant he could teach young Filipino pilots how to handle emergencies. He said, "I do not want to be famous. I want to make more pilots like me." Marcus supported him completely. Marcus had also changed. He had taken a leave from flying to write a small book himself, not for money, but for his own children. The book was called The Filipino Who Taught Me to Fly. It was a children's book about a German pilot who thought he knew everything and a Filipino pilot who showed him he knew nothing. It sold almost no copies. But Marcus did not care. He gave copies to every young pilot he met. He said, "Read this. Learn this. Pride is the real enemy. Not storms. Not engine failures. Pride." Then came the last flight. It was not supposed to be special. Just a short hop from Manila to Puerto Princesa, a tourist town on Palawan, Rico's home island. Marcus was visiting from Germany, so Rico invited him to ride in the jump seat, the small fold-down seat behind the pilots. Marcus agreed happily. He had missed the cockpit. He had missed the smell of aviation fuel and coffee. He had missed the quiet hum of the engines at cruise. The captain that day was a young Filipino woman named Captain Luzviminda, one of Rico's former students. The first officer was a young Filipino man named Captain June. Both of them were excellent. Both of them had been trained by Rico himself. Rico sat in the jump seat behind them, wearing civilian clothes, a simple blue polo shirt and jeans. Marcus sat beside him. The plane took off at 3 in the afternoon. The sky was clear. The sea below was turquoise and calm. Luzviminda flew with easy confidence. June handled the radios like a pro. Marcus leaned over to Rico and whispered, "They are good. You trained them well." Rico smiled. He said, "They are better than me. That is the point. A teacher should always be proud when the student becomes stronger." Halfway through the flight, Rico asked Luzviminda if he could say something to the passengers. She nodded. Rico picked up the cabin microphone. He took a breath. He said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rico Santos, though I am not your captain today. I am just a passenger. But I wanted to tell you something. Look out your windows. Look at the sea. Look at the islands. This is my home. This is the Philippines. And I want you to know that the pilots flying this plane today, Captain Luzviminda and Captain June, are two of the finest aviators I have ever known. They are Filipino. They are brave. They are skilled. And they will get you home safely. So please, relax. Enjoy the flight. And remember, a pilot is not defined by his passport. A pilot is defined by his heart." He set down the microphone. The passengers applauded. Marcus put a hand on Rico's shoulder and squeezed. He said, "You finally said it out loud." Rico nodded. He said, "It took me a long time to believe it myself." The plane landed in Puerto Princesa as the sun was setting. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple. Rico stood up and stretched. He looked at Marcus and said, "Come. I want to show you something." They walked off the plane together, down the stairs onto the tarmac. The heat of the day was fading. A soft wind blew from the sea. Rico pointed toward the horizon, where a line of small fishing boats bobbed on the water. He said, "My father used to take me out on a boat like those. Every morning before school. He taught me to read the wind. To feel the waves. To never fear the storm. Everything I know about flying, I learned from a fisherman who never went to school." Marcus looked at the boats. He looked at Rico. He said, "Your father must be very proud." Rico smiled. He said, "He died 5 years ago. But I think he knows. I think he sees." Marcus put his arm around Rico's shoulders. They stood there together, two pilots from two different worlds, watching the sun sink into the sea. That night, they ate dinner at a small food stall near the beach. Grilled fish, rice, and beer. Rico's family joined them. His mother, who was tiny and fierce and laughed like a thunderstorm. His sister, who was a nurse. His 3 nephews, who ran around the table chasing a stray dog. Marcus watched them and felt something he had not felt since childhood. He felt like he belonged. Like he had found a second home. Rico raised his bottle of beer. He said, "To my big German bear. The best friend I ever had." Marcus raised his bottle. He said, "To my little Filipino brother. The best pilot I ever knew." They drank. The nephews cheered. The mother pinched Marcus's cheek and called him handsome. Marcus blushed. Rico laughed so hard he almost fell off his chair. It was perfect. It was the kind of night that you wish could last forever. But forever is a lie. 6 months later, Marcus got sick. It started with a cough. Then a fever that would not go away. Then weight loss. Then pain. The doctors in Hamburg ran tests. They called Marcus into a small room with bad lighting and worse news. Stage 4 lung cancer. It had spread too far to stop. Marcus asked how long. The doctor said, 6 months. Maybe less. Marcus did not cry. He called Rico. He said, "My friend, I need you to come to Germany. I need to see you one more time." Rico was in Manila, preparing for a training flight. He dropped everything. He flew to Frankfurt within 24 hours. He walked into Marcus's apartment and found his big German bear sitting on a couch, thin and pale, an oxygen tube in his nose. Rico sat down beside him. He did not say it will be okay. He did not say you will beat this. He said, "I am here. I will stay until the end." Marcus took Rico's hand. He said, "I am not afraid to die. I am just sad to leave you." Rico nodded. He said, "In the Philippines, we say that goodbye is not the end. It is just a different kind of flying. You go ahead. I will catch up." The last weeks were hard. Marcus grew weaker. He could not walk. He could not eat. But he could still talk. And he talked constantly about flying. About the storm over Cebu. About the emergency landing on Okinawa. About the hydraulic failure over Manila. He made Rico promise to keep training young Filipino pilots. He made Rico promise to visit his children in Hamburg every year. He made Rico promise to never stop flying. Rico promised everything. On the last day, Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Rico. He said, "Do you remember what you told me? About death being just a neighbor?" Rico nodded. Marcus smiled. He said, "I am going to open the door now. It was a good flight, my friend. A very good flight." Then he closed his eyes. And he was gone. Rico sat beside him for a long time. He did not cry. He held Marcus's hand and remembered every laugh, every storm, every landing. Then he stood up. He walked out of the apartment. He went to the airport. He flew back to Manila. And the next day, he went back to work. 1 year later, Rico stood in front of a class of new Filipino pilots. 30 young men and women in white uniforms, their eyes bright with hope. Rico held up a small object. It was Marcus's old pilot wings, the silver ones he had worn for 20 years. Marcus's children had sent them to Rico after the funeral. Rico pinned the wings to his own chest, right beside the Philippine flag. He looked at the students. He said, "These wings belong to my brother. A German pilot who thought he knew everything until a Filipino showed him otherwise. He taught me that pride is the enemy. He taught me that skill has no nationality. He taught me that love is the only thing that matters in the end. I want you to remember his name. Captain Marcus Brandt. And I want you to remember this. When you are up there, in the storm, in the dark, in the fire, you are not alone. Every pilot who came before you is in that cockpit with you. Your teachers. Your friends. Your family. We are all flying together. Always. The students sat in silence. Then they applauded. And somewhere, in a place beyond the sky, Marcus heard them. And he smiled. Rico flew for 10 more years. He trained hundreds of pilots. He never crashed again. He never had another emergency. He just flew, day after day, from Manila to Cebu to Davao to Tokyo to Singapore. He carried Marcus's wings with him on every flight. Sometimes, on clear nights, when the stars were bright and the sea was calm, he would look over at the empty co-pilot's seat and whisper, "Big German bear, do you see this sky? It is beautiful tonight." And he would swear, just for a moment, that he heard a laugh. A deep, warm, German laugh. The laugh of a man who had learned to dance in the rain. The laugh of a brother. The laugh of a friend. Then Rico would turn back to the controls, adjust his heading, and fly on into the dark. Because that is what pilots do. They fly. They protect. They love. And they never, ever forget the ones who taught them how.